Hello everyone, Jay Warden here, and welcome to my recap and review of the very first episode of Star Trek Picard, where we catch up with the franchise's future timeline for the first time since Nemesis and see what our old hero Picard has been up to in his twilight years. Be warned, there will be many spoilers ahead for this episode and previous Trek series, otherwise, enjoy. We open this brand new series with Bing Crosby's Blue Skies playing to some fancy nebula shots, and without missing a beat we're hit straight into nostalgia feels by seeing the old 1701D before zooming into 10 forward where an elderly Picard and a de-aged elderly Data are playing a game of poker. As the two discuss how Data fakes his tells and Picard oddly has some milk with his Earl Grey, even though I totally have milk with mine, so go fuck yourself, Data asks Picard why he's stalling from making his final move when suddenly Mars pops up outside the window and then violently explodes. Thankfully though, it's all just a dream and Picard wakes up in his bed at Chateau Picard, with his number one dog beside him before taking a melancholic look at his grand vineyard. Next up we're meeting some hot young lady who's staring lovingly at the alien eyes of her boyfriend, or maybe all the chocolate buttons on his head, and we learn her name is Daj, and she's pretty happy because she just got into the Daystrom Institute, which, as any Loaded Trek fan knows, is basically the Star Trek equivalent of Oxford or Harvard University. But their loving antics don't last very long as a bunch of unknown chaps in motorcycle helmets beam in, immediately kill the boyfriend and start beating the crap out of Daj before putting some funky mind probes on her. They start interrogating her, but she seems to have no idea what the fuck is going on, so they prepare to knock her out by just putting a bag loosely on her head because that's how you knock someone out? Unfortunately for our would-be assailants, it seems to trigger something in her and she suddenly turns into River Tam, beating the living shit out of the intruders in annoying quick camera cut fashion and then phases them all to death. Shocked at what she just did and at the death of her boyfriend, she quickly sees an image of Picard in her mind and it seems she knows where she must go next. Back at the chateau, after a lovely sunny stroll with number one, we meet Picard's Romulan butlers, Zaban and Laris, who comment on his dreams before explaining to us that it's a big day for Picard, as he's agreed to give an interview to the Federation News Network. FNN? Really? And after getting all suited up, they both give him a pep talk about being himself, remembering who he is, and reassures him that the reporter specifically agreed not to bring up his reasons for leaving Starfleet. But we all know that's not going to last, and sure enough, the antagonistic twat of a reporter brings it up, and after pushing and pushing, and delivering lots of background exposition, Picard has finally had enough of her bullshit and tells her plainly that Starfleet had ceased to be the Starfleet he knew and served, because of its refusal to help the Romulans evacuate their doomed homeworld. You see, there was a deadly attack on Mars by synthetics, or synths, that pretty much laid waste to it and the rescue fleet that was being built there to help evacuate Romulus before its sun exploded, which also led to the banning of the construction of new synths, though no one knows why they went rogue in the first place. Picard schools her in some history, promptly terminates the interview, and goes back to drinking some fine wine in his gorgeous backyard. But his drinking is quickly interrupted by the arrival of Daj, who tearily explains to a bewildered Picard what happened to her and that something inside of her feels totally safe with him. Inside the chateau, Picard comments on her unusual looking necklace, which doesn't look that unusual to me, and Daj goes on to explain that for some reason she seems to intimately know Picard somehow and that she can't explain it, and Picard seems to realise that she might be right because there's a spark of recognition somewhere but he just can't seem to place it. So it's back to the dream world and Picard, in classic TNG uniform, sees Data doing some painting in the vineyard and offers Picard the brush to help him finish it, insisting that Picard knows how. Waking up, realization hits Picard and in his study he sees the finished painting he just saw in his dream while Laris comes in saying Daj has vanished without a trace. But Picard is now fixed on this painting, so heads off to the Jedi Archives in San Francisco to see some old Trek memorabilia he has stored away, including a second version of the painting, both of which were made by Data way back in the 5th season of TNG. A close-up inspection shows the face of Daj as the woman in the painting and the title is simply Daughter. Daj meanwhile contacts her mother for help, but strangely her mother seems to know something she doesn't about who she might be and simply tells her to close her eyes, focus and go back to Picard for safety, and after some quick technical shenanigans manages to quickly locate and meet up back with him. Relieved to see her, they have a sit down and Picard tells her what he learned and that he suspects she might be an android herself like Data, only a little bit more sophisticated given she can bleed and all. She has some trouble accepting this reality, and who wouldn't when you're told you're a Cylon, but before they can go any further she realises that more motorcycle helmet thugs have found her and tries to drag Picard with her, clearly struggling given he's almost a century old at this point and not the virile young man he used to be. But it's no use and once again we're treated to a quick cut ninja fight scene where she River Tams and Neos the fuck out of them despite their best attempts to shoot her, and by best I mean skills that rival any Imperial Stormtrooper. We do get a quick glimpse this time of who these guys are and it seems they're Romulan, but even as Daj seems victorious, one of the Romulans spits some green goo at her which begins melting her face and the disruptor rifle she commandeered, which then explodes, killing her and the remaining assassins and knocking Picard back violently, surely killing the elderly gentleman. But no, it turns out he's already back at the chateau, instead of, a hospital, with a simple knock to the head and apparently no evidence of what happened. Picard is mournful at her death and blames himself and thinks it's time to stop sitting at home writing books and making fine wine and to actually go on one final adventure to find out what's really going on here. So it's off to the Daystrom Institute where we meet Dr. Agnes Jurati, the head of advanced synthetic research where, due to the ban on synths, all they can actually do is some theoretical work. He inquires about the creation of flesh and blood androids that he can have tea with, much to her amusement, before realising he's deadly serious. Apparently she was recruited by one Bruce Maddox to help create a proper Soong-type android just like Data, and that a flesh and blood version was within their sights but that they were never successful. We get a brief look at B4, someone we'd all like to forget, and thankfully that plotline never went anywhere and was ultimately a failure in keeping Data's neural net alive, and Jurati exposits some more about how after the synth ban, Maddox was a bit depressed and decided to fuck off to regions unknown. Picard then shows Jurati the necklace that Dahj gave him, and it seems she knows all too well what this generic looking necklace means, and after some dubious technobabble regarding a theory from Maddox, Data's entire neural net consciousness could be recreated from a single positronic neuron, in effect recreating the essence of Data, and in a further plot twist, such beings are created in pairs, for some reason. Cut immediately to a Romulan ship entering the hangar of some large reclamation site, we see some emo-looking Romulan chap doing a sinister walk before coming upon the apparent twin sister of Dahj, called Dr. Soji Asher, with matching necklace to boot, and introduces himself as Narek. Narek gushes a little about working with her and then gives her a little sob story of his past before getting a long camera zoom out to reveal the reclamation site is actually a heavily damaged Borg cube. So here we are. After 18 years since Star Trek Nemesis was on the big screen, we finally resumed the Star Trek timeline instead of jumping back into his past with prequels like Enterprise, JJ Trek and Discovery. And I've been wanting this for such a long time. This will probably be a rather long review as there's a lot to go through and catch up on, and there are many points I want to address, so let's get on with it. I'll admit I've been rather worried about how this series will end up, given my general disappointment with Discovery, and that many of the same people who work on that are producing Picard as well. The character of Jean-Luc Picard has always been a hero and role model for me as a child growing up, so I feel far more invested in how this will turn out. I've managed to largely avoid spoilers and most speculation, doing nothing but watching a trailer when it comes out, so I can watch and enjoy without knowing too much of what's in store for me. And the end result? Well, so far, it's mostly okay. It has issues. It's still missing that core optimistic feel that makes Star Trek, well, Star Trek, and is one of the many reasons I don't like Discovery all that much. But they haven't ruined the character of Picard, yet. They seem to be largely respectful to the canon and lore that came before, so far. And there are nice nods to the past without being too much about the nostalgic member berries while clearly establishing its own distinct path and identity. Make no mistake, this is not Discovery, but nor is it TNG. Many of the character moments with Picard feel slower paced and have time to breathe. The camera work is far more steady and lets us take in the scenes, not helicoptering around distractingly all the time like in Discovery. The overall pace feels quite fast at times as we're hit with lots of exposition, reintroducing us to Picard, what's happened in the galaxy since Nemesis, and also introducing us to various new characters. There are certainly elements I don't like too, mostly centred on the action scenes as well as some of the technobabble given to us at the end regarding Data, Maddox, and the creation of Dahj and her sister Soji. But overall, I certainly didn't come away with a particularly negative opinion, and I feel interested and invested in what will happen next, at least for now. So, where to begin? Well, let's start with the titular character himself. As I said, I had some fears going into this and how they would treat the character of Picard, given my problems with Discovery, but I think Patrick Stewart has, without a doubt, still totally got it. He is an elderly man now at this point, and if I have any one regret, it's that his voice truly sounds it. It's lost that booming gravitas he had back in TNG, but such is age and it's rarely kind to us in our twilight years. Despite this, and despite my fears, he's still the Picard we all remember from TNG, not the action hero he kind of turned into during the films. This is most notable during his interview with the annoying news reporter. Once he's pushed far enough, he goes full Picard by giving her a wonderful little speech regarding history and showing us some righteous moral anger at the failure of Starfleet and the Federation, or what they should represent when they cancelled their rescue mission to Romulus. This is the Picard I wanted to see. one who is a passionate student of history and doing the right moral and principled thing, like for example when she mentions Romulan lives, he corrects her by just saying, no, lives. It's exactly the sort of thing he would stand up for and has done many times in the past. I also like and think it makes sense on how withdrawn he's become given he lost faith in Starfleet. He has been in complete, dedicated service to it all his life, to what it represents, and to see that change into something else that he can't abide by is also very Picard because he's so principled. It's one of the core tenets of the character. He sticks to his principles and his true belief in what the Federation should be about, no matter what. So I like that it shows him to be a more broken, reclusive figure, his belief in the organisation he once loved shattered, and how the loss of Data in Nemesis also had a huge emotional impact on him. I can buy that the chance to get a piece of that past relationship back, to help Data's legacy live on in Dahj or her twin Soji, is something he would definitely fight for, would reinvigorate him and give him a new purpose in life, to actually do something than just sit around, sipping wine and waiting to die. This brings me to Dahj. While Issa Briones did a decent job here, I think, with her portrayal, I can't say I'm all that enamoured with the character herself. I think this may stem from my dislike of the action scenes, which I'll cover more in a bit, but she came across as very River Tam from Firefly, an emotionally damaged young girl with an unknown past who can turn into an ass-kicking superweapon when triggered. However, I can buy that her android nature would give her far greater strength, reflexes, and the ability to get into computer systems, so that was fine for me, and it makes sense for me how emotionally distressed she is after seeing her boyfriend get killed and then going on to kill her assailants. Her mother, and I use that term loosely, clearly seems to know something about her true nature, and I actually wondered if she was a real person because there's this brief moment where the transmission stutters when Dahj realises she never mentioned Picard's name to her, as if it was some sort of programming glitch when her mother realised she tripped up, but it could just be a communication distortion as well, I guess. I don't know, it just seemed rather coincidental that this glitch happened just then and nowhere else in the conversation. In any case, Dahj doesn't really stick around long enough for us to really get to know her, and to my surprise, she gets killed. I really wasn't expecting that, so it was nice to be a bit surprised like this, and then we learn that the method of her creation means that they're done in pairs, and thus she has a twin sister who we meet at the very end called Soji. We know nothing of her yet save her introduction, so it'll be interesting to see if she's identical to Dahj in personality as well as appearance, or just a somewhat different version, or even if there's perhaps a more Data lore-like angle going on here in some fashion. The whole necklace thing though, I didn't like that, that was dumb. It's apparently an unusual necklace and Dr. Jurati recognises it as a symbol of some technobabble we get into that explains her creation, but it's just a very generic, boring Venn diagram looking necklace to me. I do like though how they tie the painting to her and by extension Data. I was wondering for a while if she was a version of Lal, Data's daughter that he created from the TNG episode The Offspring, and given his painting was created 3 years after her death, there's some mild similarity to their appearance, but it's later suggested that she's actually more an essence of Data himself. I also really like how they tied in Bruce Maddox to the story and how he is probably her creator. We only ever see Maddox once, and that was in the superb second season episode The Measure of a Man, where he tried to have Data disassembled to learn how to construct more beings like him. He's only mentioned in passing again, but we learned that Data maintained a relationship with him, writing letters to give him insights as to how Data perceives the world and learns in order to help with his research. In any case, it's firmly established in lore that Maddox is dedicated to this field of research, and I can totally buy that he would be the next Doctor soon to create a new Data. I do find myself wondering if Juliana Taylor will come into this in any way. For those that don't remember, this was another Soong-type android created by the Good Doctor who was essentially a replica of his wife that died from the attack by the crystalline entity where Data was constructed, and we got to meet her in the 7th season TNG episode Inheritance. She was a very human-looking android, even going as far as to have what appeared to be veins, tear ducts and sweat glands, but still, once injured, her true nature was very clearly revealed, unlike Dahj who bleeds like any normal human. Taina, however, was programmed to eventually self-terminate to give the illusion of a natural lifespan, but it is conceivable that she will make an appearance or somehow tie into the story perhaps. Or they just might forget about her entirely. We'll see. Who does make an appearance here is B4, who was discovered in a very contrived fashion in Nemesis and was downloaded with Data's memories before Data sacrificed himself. I hated B4, and it felt like some sort of cheat the writers had made in order to bring Data back in the future somehow. And I actually like how they quickly established that B4 was ultimately a failure and those memories were degraded and eventually lost. Which neatly brings me to Data himself. I was worried when I first saw the trailers because Brent Spiner, like Stuart, is not a young man anymore, and it really shows, even with some de-aging. Data's appearance looked very off in the trailers, but it's clear between the trailer and the final release some work has been done on him. I was hoping that all we would see of Data is either flashback or dream sequences rather than a genuine appearance, and thankfully this seems to be the case, and that Data is still very much dead. So I can pretty much gloss over the aging issue because dreams are usually distorted images of our subconscious mind and memories, and this shows in the first opening sequence with Picard and Data playing poker. Although it's very welcome to see the gorgeously remade Enterprise D, however briefly, and the 10 forward set, something felt off or disjointed about it in the lighting, the emptiness in the room, Picard having milk with his tea, the fact that Data is wearing a First Contact era uniform, which came after the destruction of the Enterprise D, and playing poker in 10 forward when it was usually done in the privacy of their quarters. This is all fine as it fits with the disjointed reality of a dream. A later dream sequence shows both characters in their TNG era uniforms, and again this is all fine and works for me as it helps point Picard to the answers he seeks regarding the mystery of Dahj and how she does seem familiar to him somehow. I'm happy to say Brent Spiner is still wonderful in the role, and watching him and Picard interact felt great. I've little else to say about any of the other characters at this point except for the Romulan Laris who works at Picard's chateau. This might seem like a minor nitpicky quibble, but the actress who plays her is Irish and I picked up on that accent immediately, and for some reason I found it rather distracting to hear an Irish Romulan. I know you could argue, well, what's the difference between that or an American British Romulan, and well, there isn't one, except that we simply take for granted the generic accents of our aliens depending on where it's filmed, and most of the time it's either American or British. I know for example some people can't get behind the Australian accented aliens of Farscape, but for me it's totally fine as that was made in Australia. Perhaps the Universal Translator simply puts her accent into Irish due to some other Romulan dialect or accent, but now that I think about it, all our Romulan characters introduced so far feel very human in the way they're portrayed. If not for the pointy ears, they would be indistinguishable from a human character. And perhaps too much contemporary 21st century slang is used as well, given the words dude and tragic are used in the beginning with Dahj and her boyfriend. Remember how confused our various past characters can be with slang words or metaphors when travelling into contemporary time periods?
This lab is, pretty groovy.
Moving. Where's Captain Picard?
He's on ice.
Pardon?
He's being grilled.
What is he, a fish?
I gotta take a leak.
Leak? I'm not detecting any leak.
Watch where you're going, you dumbass!
Well, a double dumbass on you!
Double dumbass on you, and so forth.
You mean the profanity?
Yes.
That's simply the way they talk here. Nobody pays any attention to you unless you swear every other word.
Anyway, moving on, I guess we should talk about the Romulans themselves next, and the overall political situation the Star Trek galaxy now finds itself in. Although I'm certainly not a big fan of the JJ Trek films, yes, you can fuck right off into darkness, it was firmly established in canon that Romulus was destroyed by a supernova, albeit retconned here somewhat as only being the Romulan star that explodes and not a galactic ending supernova that is suggested in the 2009 movie. I'm not sure I completely buy the Federation being suddenly so against helping, as that goes against the very core ideal of the Federation, even if it's an enemy. But, with that said, the Romulans have always been an antagonist and enemy to the Federation far longer than the Klingons ever were. The only time this was put aside was when they joined the alliance against the Dominion, eventually anyway, and even then it was only out of convenience, with Sloane of Section 31 aptly noting that after the dust settles, they would still end up being the primary enemy of the Federation, vying for control of the quadrant. As a result, I can buy that some people within the Federation would resent helping the Romulans, who have done so much in the past to destabilise and undermine them, and even come close to open conflict with them on several occasions. Pretty much centuries of distrust at this point. Think of the undiscovered country and the attitude some had towards the Klingons. People within Starfleet, including Kirk himself to an extent, refused to trust the Klingons and would have preferred to simply let them die, or bring them to their knees rather than help them out when their own homeworld of Kronos was threatened by the destruction of their moon Praxis. And how many times have admirals in Star Trek been quite authoritarian or militant in their actions and ideals? Remember, for example, how Admiral Pressman was prepared to break a treaty to develop advanced cloaking technology because of how much he viewed it as an essential to the defense of the Federation from its enemies, particularly the Romulans. Or when Admiral Layton literally tried to instigate a military coup in order to protect the Federation from the threat of the Dominion. Or, as in the aforementioned undiscovered country, Admiral Cartwright conspired with others to prevent peace with the Klingons. So yeah, I will buy for now that the Federation's reluctance comes from its highest levels to refuse a race that has been nothing but trouble for them since even before the very founding of the Federation. What I don't buy nearly as much is that the Federation as a whole has just become a reclusive, more xenophobic organisation, as well as the line about spending resources in a universe that is essentially a post-scarcity one. When you have things like replicators that can magic all sorts of things into existence, is it really that hard to build more ships? Don't the Romulans have their own shipyards that can build thousands of rescue ships too? As a result, this makes me wonder why the attack on Mars by the synths, which wipes out much of the rescue fleet being built, would cause the Federation to simply abandon their eventual offer of help, but then to be fair, we don't know yet why the synths attacked in the first place and how this ties into the Romulans. Which it surely will, I'm sure, so I'm happy for now to wait on this a bit to see before I pass total judgment. I am very curious to see how the Romulans function now as a society without their homeworld. There are indications that some of them have simply settled down to enjoy their lives in peace, as is indicated with Laris and Zaban, even though we don't know much about them yet. But there's also a sinister faction at work with the attacks on Daj, and the salvage efforts going on with the Borg Cube could also be another faction. Is this faction the representative arm of what's left of the Romulan government, or one of several splinter factions with different agendas? Is the Narek character a part of this sinister faction? His slow-motion, darkly lit introduction implies he has a sinister ulterior motive before giving Soji a sad sob story that allows him to befriend her. I also wonder if the attack from the synths on Mars have anything to do with the Borg, as it's clear they will have a large role in this series given the appearance of Hugh and 7 of 9 in the trailers. So, many questions I hope we get some answers to going forward. Aesthetically speaking, the show looks gorgeous. As I've already said, the brief shot of the Enterprise D was amazing. I wish we could have seen a bit more of her in all her modern glory. Far better than the last CGI shot we got of her in Enterprise, which was rather cartoonish looking in my opinion. There's definitely something to be said for using real-world models back in the day because it makes the ships look so much more realistic. Most of the episode takes place on Earth, so we don't get a huge amount of tech or futuristic sets, but I like that what we did see felt much more in place and acceptable to the timeline than Discovery's aesthetic does for the TOS timeline. We even still have the familiar looking LCARS computer interface here, and that's very welcome. I wasn't as big a fan of the Quantum Archives, I just couldn't help but think of the Jedi Archives in Attack of the Clones, but it was nice to see some of the old memorabilia, including the awesome Captain Picard Day banner and a real Batleth. But there are some things I absolutely do not like in this episode. By far for me the worst aspect was the action scenes. It just felt very generic, modern TV action with far too many quick camera cuts, and that Matrix-style jump that Daj did just looked awful. When I'm treated to fight scenes like The Witcher's Geralt of Rivia cutting down a bunch of men brutally in a single long take, or maybe John Wick doing the same in his films, I feel this kind of action is just far too dull and eye-rolling in nature. It reminds me of Discovery's own action sequences, of which there are many, with lots of quick cut action and stuff happening to please the action junkies and stop people getting bored. I know Star Trek action fight scenes have never been, well, great.
Put down your weapons!
We've got to seal those doors.
That said, Star Trek has never in the past been about having ultra-violent action scenes, so maybe just have less of this kind of stuff overall. But I think they could have done a much better job here of making this look far more interesting and cool. I hate how the attackers can't seem to shoot anything accurately at all. I mean, it's just so contrived at this point because to me, Dahj doesn't even look like she's effectively dodging the shots, just running rather fast in a straight line and hoping she doesn't get hit until she does that really dumb, awful looking Matrix jump. I was also wondering why these attackers look like they're just generic motorcycle villains in terms of costume design. Also, Picard getting blown back violently and just waking up with a knock to the head was somewhat unbelievable to me, considering a person in their 90s today can simply fall over, break their hip and die. That knockback would have more likely killed, or at least seriously injured someone of his age, regardless of how advanced medical technology is. I didn't like either how jarring the shift from the action to him waking up was, as it made me wonder if this was just another dream sequence somehow. But it clearly establishes that it did happen, except there isn't any evidence despite the massive explosions, phaser fights and debris that should have been hanging around, in the heart of Starfleet no less. This also begs the question of why the fuck did Dahj drag Picard up to a deserted rooftop instead of hanging around the very crowded area where lots of people, particularly Starfleet officers and cameras, could have seen what was going on? Presuming these Romulans want to keep a fairly low profile, would they really beam in here and do all this for all to see? The Federation news reporter was very annoying and again felt a little too contemporary for my taste, but I guess ultimately served a decent purpose in showing us a really nice Picard moment. Though the FNN-CNN comparison really did irritate me, especially as in the past it was referred to as the Federation News Service, not network. But whatever, that's a minor quibble. The other major thing I didn't like was the use of technobabble explaining the creation of Dahj and Soji. As I understand it, they were apparently created from a single positronic neuron from data to essentially recreate an entire neural network. But I don't buy it. It sounds dumb to me. The earlier stuff I bought that they couldn't replicate the science that created Data in the first place, and because Data died and B4 failed to maintain his memories or neural networks, they were never able to do anything other than the synths that they created, which went on to attack Mars. That's fine and understandable. But when they trotted out this explanation of making two sentient flesh and blood androids out of a single cell, yeah, sorry, you lost me there. But whatever, that's the explanation they've gone with, and Star Trek is certainly no stranger to bullshit technobabble to serve as a plot, so we'll see how it plays out in the long run. One final, utterly nerdy nitpick: the zoomed in exterior shot of 10 Forward's windows don't match up with the interior. I know, I'm sorry, I just can't help but notice these things. So there we go. I'm going to stop there before this turns into an hour-long review. I realise that this may have seemed like a rather critical or nitpicky review, but I do want to emphasise that I don't hate this. I'm not against it, I don't have a negative opinion of it. I just have a few issues, and it's hard to judge this properly yet because this will be a heavily serialised narrative like most modern TV, so until we get to see the whole picture, I can't say if I'm completely sold yet. But overall, I have a generally positive impression. I'm interested to see where this will go. I'm happy Picard is still Picard, so far anyway. And its issues are nowhere near game-breaking for me as I feared it might have been. Well, again, not yet anyway. So, I shall see you next time for the second episode, Maps and Legends. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did then please do check out my other reviews as well. And also if you haven't yet then please like, subscribe and share. Until next time, this is Jay Warden, signing off.